My name is Arathi Sriprakash. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the Faculty of Education and Social Work here at the University of Sydney. My work largely focuses on the rights to education in the Indian context and the ways in which schooling can contribute to social change and social justice. I'm thrilled to be part of this public forum. To me, this kind of public discussion of child rights issues is important for at least two reasons. Firstly, it encourages us to think deeply about how our social systems and practices relate to the rights of the child, how these rights are connected to local and global issues of gender, labour markets, political participation, to name just a few. I'm hoping the discussions tonight push us to consider our collective responsibilities for the rights of the child and remind us that we're not talking about something that's out there, but something that is very much tied to our perspectives and actions in here. Secondly, this kind of public discussion gives us the opportunity to reflect on the assumptions that are made, both about children's lives and our role in acting upon them. It is an opportunity to learn about the different social and material conditions shaping children's lives, and to consider the different responses these conditions call for. Most importantly, when we talk about local and global action relating to poverty and children, I'd like to suggest that we move away from a language of benevolence and towards a language of rights. This marks firmly the commitment that is needed, not out of charity or exception, but out of collective, systemic and sustained obligation to the rights of the child. So, with this in mind, it is a great honour to be here tonight to welcome you to the 69th Forum in this national series called One Just World, sponsored by the Australian Government's International Development Agency, AusAid, in partnership with the International Women's Development Agency and World Vision Australia. These organisations are joined by the University of Sydney for this year's Sydney One Just World Forum, and for this forum, we're also proud to be working with UNICEF Australia. One Just World is about providing a platform for ideas and conversations about important development issues and how these might be addressed, to enable you to talk directly with those involved in development, make your own suggestions, and find out more about the ways in which you can get involved. Our panellists tonight will be challenging us to reflect on our social obligations towards the global poor, especially children. Please let me now introduce you to Liz Jackson, our moderator for this evening. As one of Australia's most respected journalists, Liz actually needs very little introduction. But to give you some background, Liz is a senior reporter for ABC TV's Four Corners program and has been at the forefront of investigative journalism. Her work as a reporter has included coverage of the fall of the Suharto regime in Indonesia, corruption in international cricket, the war in Iraq, and sexual abuse in Aboriginal communities. Liz has won 3 Logie Awards for outstanding coverage of public affairs, 7 Walkley Awards for coverage of Indigenous issues, international affairs, sports and social equity, and 2 Human Rights Awards. She has also been awarded the highly coveted Gold Walkley for excellence in journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome tonight, and I give you Liz Jackson.
Look, thanks very much, Arathi, and good evening, and great to see you all here, and welcome. There's a couple of housekeeping matters we have to do first, which is, can everybody put their mobile phones on silent? But in this case, please feel free to leave them on. And if you want to get involved in the Twitter conversation while the discussion is happening, the hashtag for this particular discussion is 1JW, that's the number 1, and then the capital letters JW, and you can get involved in the Twitter conversation. And along similar lines, it's my happy task to let you know that One Just World is launching its mobile site tonight. So if you visit onejustworld.com.au on your smartphone, you can check out the new look and be sure to let One Just World know what you think. about the layout, but bear in mind that it's going to be updated during the week and your user experience should become more and more mobile friendly. So good luck with that. And on to the actual discussion. And tonight we're really lucky to have 3 exceptional participants in this particular discussion. They're all extremely well qualified. And I'm sure that at the end of this discussion, we will realise, they will make clear to us why it's so important to recognise the rights of children and what action is needed from all of us to protect the world's most vulnerable children. We're incredibly fortunate to be joined all the way from New York, our first panellist tonight, by originally from Chile, but now from New York, is Marta Mauras, the recently retired Vice President of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. In 2008, Marta was the Special Envoy of UNICEF for Latin America and the Caribbean, and before this she served 2 years as Secretary of the Commission at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and 7 years as the Director for Economic and Social Affairs in the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. So that's a fantastic background. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marta Mauras. Our next guest is Justin Dillon, also from the United States. Justin is the founder and CEO of Made in a Free World, a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to ending modern-day slavery. In 2008, Justin made his directorial debut in a film called Call and Response. And I actually had a look at it the other night. It's fantastic. It's got brilliant movement, music, and just quite heart-rending scenes of children involved in various forms of exploitation. So I do recommend it if you can watch it on YouTube, I presume? No?
Parts of it.
Parts of it. Check it out if you have the opportunity. I mean, it revealed there are more slaves today than ever before in human history. And in 2011, Justin, in partnership with the US State Department, founded the award-winning website, Slavery Footprint, which poses the quite provocative question, how many slaves work for you? Last year, US President Barack Obama acknowledged his organisation's work in his speech on slavery to the Clinton Global Institute. Please welcome Justin Dillon. And our final panellist is Guna Vincent, founder and advisor of the Indian NGO Mahalaya Sakti. Guna founded her organisation in 2005 with the goal of empowering children and women of the most disadvantaged caste backgrounds living in the suburbs of Madurai, India. Having grown up in a slum herself, Gina knows all too well the lack of opportunity for children growing up in India's poorest areas. Prior to founding Mahalaya Sakti, Guna spent 30 years working within the Ministry of Finance for the Government of India. And during this time, she was also dedicated to the empowerment of women with a number of NGOs, including People's Education for Action and Liberation, a senior NGO in Tamil Nadu. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Guna Vincent. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to ask each of the panellists to address us for about 3 minutes. To give us an overall sense of where they're coming from and why and how they got involved in this particular area of work. But One Just World have asked me just to say a few things to convey where in a sense, One Just World is coming from on this. And essentially, the perspective is that every child has a right to a childhood, the right to play, the right to grow, the right to be heard, and the right to be protected from harm. But for many children, this is far from reality. They come into this world trusting and full of hope, but instead they are abused, exploited, or forgotten, deprived of their childhood and their basic human rights. What One Just World is interested in finding out from the discussion today as part of a broader program is what is the answer. While addressing poverty can reduce the risk of children being exposed to abuse, neglect and exploitation, is this the whole story? Is a focus on poverty alleviation enough? Or does the protection of children's rights require a more targeted or holistic approach? So those are the kinds of issues that we'll be raising tonight. And I'd like to start by asking Marta if she could talk to us. I mean, specifically, I think I was interested, in your role as Vice President of the United Nations, you were involved in monitoring whether or not countries were fulfilling their obligations. And I'd be really interested to know, in the time that you were there, how would you describe the trends in terms of what was the positive, what were the negative things in that area?
Well, thank you very much. And I'm also very happy to be here and to be among this distinguished group of people. Let me tell you, I am from Chile and I am still in Chile. Although I devoted most of my professional career to women's issues, children's issues, working in the UN, particularly in UNICEF in several different parts of the world. In the last 4 years, I had the privilege of being elected into the Committee on the Rights of the Child. What is the Committee on the Rights of the Child? It is precisely the body of 18 experts, independent experts, that monitors the application by all 194 states that have ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child in terms of its becoming a reality in each of the countries. 194 countries is even more than the General Assembly, actually. It is the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the most widely ratified convention. And therefore, the rights of the child are basically almost universally binding for all states, except 2. The United States is one, and that's an important omission indeed. And Somalia is the other state. Now, the Committee on the Rights of the Child has this amazing possibility of looking at the whole world, basically. In 23 years that it has been operating, more than 500 reports have been processed. Now, each state that ratifies obligates itself to implement the convention and also to report about how it's doing every 5 years. And that's what the committee does.
I was hoping if you could just give us a brief thumbnail. I mean, in the time that you were the vice president, was it a good news story or a bad news story?
Well, it's a mixed story. It's a mixed story, like always.
Tell us maybe about the good news, and we'll come on to we'll get into the bad news when we get into the discussion.
The good news is that there is a growing body of a growing awareness and a growing body of experience in terms of applying the human rights to national legislation, policy, programs. There is also a very strong movement out in the world. Here we have exponents of that by women's organizations, green organizations, laborers' organizations that are pushing the human rights agenda and ensuring, in fact, that the governments get put to the test when it comes to applying. The convention, in terms of child rights, I would say that it's even more mixed, the picture, because it is difficult for people, actually, to understand how it is and why it is that children have rights. No?
Well, we'll have to get into that, because I mean, I think there's some interesting things that you've raised, like you've said it's binding. Well, let's see what binding might actually mean. You say there's legislation, is it actually enforced? You say there are NGOs that are working in this area, are they getting the resources they need? But let's leave that for the discussion. And Justin, I was really curious to know, after watching your call and response documentary, I mean, what got you into this whole area of child slavery and child rights?
I think I've always had a penchant for justice and the participation of being involved in justice work. So I grew up listening to music that were bands that were focused very much on the rights of the poor and the oppressed. And that was very foundational for me. And so as I became a musician, as I got older, these issues kind of carried into my life. And the thing about being an artist is that, especially a performer, to really break down the joy and the work of being a performer is essentially you stand on stages like this trying to convince people to feel the way you do about something. That's what a performer does. And that, when I started learning about human trafficking, realizing how huge the issue is and how little attention it was getting, I decided to use things like this to help. And by doing concerts and whatnot, that was the early part of our work. I decided to make a film, having never made a film before, because that felt like a good idea. and brought in musicians. And I cannot tell you how easy it was to convince people to be a part of something beautiful, to bring freedom to others. Fantastically easy transaction. And that was about 5 years ago, and it's completely disrupted my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the things. There is goodwill, especially in relation to children. The question is how to direct that goodwill, how to get more than just, I'd like to do something, but I personally on my own can't, or just, so we'll leave those questions about how to translate that sense of goodwill into some sort of action. Guna, you grew up as a Dalit girl in the slums of Madura. For those, excuse me, for those who are not familiar with the Indian caste system, what does Dalit mean? And tell us what it was like for Dalit and other marginalised children growing up in the slums of India, and to what extent that's changed, if that's possible in 3 minutes.
Yeah. See, first of all, I thank the organizers for the invitation, and I bring greetings, Mauli Shakti greetings to you all, very especially. So I'm going to speak little about the crux of Dalit situation. Dalit, we want to speak, it's a very great subject. Just very briefly, I will say. Dalit is an assertive identity of the so-called unseeables. Dalit socially and economically broken people form 200 million out of 1 billion population in India. Hinduism branded them as impure and polluted, born out of immoral relationship from the 4 caste groups created by God, that is Brahma, that the 4 caste groups, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Dalits fall out of caste system but continue to face the human untouchability practices. Caste and untouchability practices deny Dalit community their right, human dignity. Living in segregation, they are prevented from enjoying all basic civil political rights, privileges, push them into poverty. They are forced for all menial and filthy and dirty jobs like manual scavenging, gutter cleaning, cobbler work, burial work, cremation work, sweeping, cleaning, etc. Their assertion for human dignity is met with a range of gruesome violence by non-Dalits, like brutal killings, maiming of limbs, destruction of their homes, livelihoods, mass raping, naked parading of Dalit women, and abusing Dalit children. Thus, Dalit women and children are worst affected. Dalit children are the awful sufferers, denied of their basic right to life. Their nature of violence on them varies, ranging from child labor, malnutrition, health care, education, playtime, environment, many other forms of sexual exploitation and abuses. Besides, dropouts from schools, forced for all menial and dirty occupations of their parent. They easily become bonded in the urban areas as child laborers, rag pickers, and vulnerable to all social problems like alcoholism, gambling, cheating, prostitution, drug addiction, HIV/AIDS, etc. Girls in particular, very much affected, and they face lots of mental and physical sufferings. Generally, Dalit children are so brilliant, so cute, inquisitive for learning, improving their language and capacities, skills and art forms. Equality and equal opportunities have been denied to Dalits for more than 3,000 years, as Ambedkar, the Dalit icon, claims. Developmental policies and programs, range of legislations and protective mechanisms of the government are yet to reach the Dalit community and the children. India's progress rests not in economic or military power growth, but definitely in the development of children in general, and very particularly Dalit children. Mauli Shakti is a very small organization, but with a great vision to establish a society with dignity, equality, justice, and peace. Mauli Shakti's mission is to capacitate and empower Dalit and disadvantaged women and children for their socio-economic and political advancement through education, leadership skills, personality of Dalit children, and to protect their health. A long way to go, but we are already on the move. We work for the silenced community, but their silence speaks a lot, striving for a human personality and dignity.
Can I just ask you, I mean, given the range of problems that you've just outlined, are you comfortable to tell us how you escaped from are you comfortable to tell us how you personally escaped from the world that you describe as a slum child from Dalit?
What she say correctly?
How did you escape from being? Yeah, how did you come out from being a Dalit?
I mean, was it difficult for you personally?
Personally?
I mean, as
Dalit
as
in
growing up
general-
as a Dalit girl, was it difficult for you to I mean, you're clearly now a highly accomplished woman. So
I didn't catch her thing, what she's asking for. You please tell me. The accent is find it difficult.
What was your own experience? How did you come out
Okay.
and become, a different person?
Yes.
Excuse me.
So through education, we can come up in life. That's the thing.
Education,
Through
basic,
education.
yeah.
Otherwise, very difficult because Dalits know the parents are very poor and uneducated. They cannot support the children's. They cannot help the children for their education. But if we give education, they can come up in life. I'm one of the example because my parents also suffered. Of course, my parents did not did that very filthy job. Dalits mostly in India, all the entire India from Panchayat to Parliament, the sweeping, cobbler, gutter cleaning, all the filthy jobs are forced on Dalit community. But they are not well paid. They are living with great stigma. People will not allow them. The so-called upper caste people will not allow these people enter into their house. Where they are pushed into poverty and they are living in stigma. And since parents are not supportive and society is not supportive, most of the Dalits are dropouts. So automatically, hereditarily, they are doing that job. So Mahali Shakti trying to give education to the Dalit children, especially the children coming from these families. We are very keen on that to minimize the dropouts.
Thanks, Guna. I'll try and make the question clearer next time. Marta, you wanted to add to that.
Because I think that Guna's description of the situation of the Dalit brings forward something that I feel is very important to point out, which is you mentioned goodwill when we were talking about the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and you said goodwill is important. This is not a question of goodwill. It's a question of rights is not a problem of goodwill. It's an imperative.
I guess I was trying to say to translate goodwill into rights. I mean, there's a
you see,
goodwill,
all the goodwill of the world would not have brought Guna out had there not been certain conditions put in place. Like, for example, an educational system, as she was saying. No? And therefore, this is what I think is important for an audience like this, to realize that this is not about, we're not talking of charity, we are not talking of, being good. We are talking about being fair, about being just with everybody. And children in particular, boys, girls, and adolescents. And let me bring this to Australia, 1 second. Because Australia is an incredibly endowed country, is one of the most affluent societies in the world. Australia came last year to the Committee on the Rights of the Child and was, examined, as we say, was examined. And it does very well in many ways, but it failed in some very important ways, which have to do basically with the basic rights of those that are less powerful, that have less voice, and in particular, the question of the way the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in Australia, peoples and children in Australia was questioned.
Was that one of the issues, the incarceration level?
Well, yes, the overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in prisons. In fact, it's 26 times more than non-Indigenous. The overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in out-of-home care. In other words, Aboriginal children get taken away from their families and put into out-of-home care for their good, no? And it's not necessarily, it doesn't work that way, in fact. And asylum-seeking is also, asylum-seeking children are also another category of children that get treated by Australian policies and laws in an extremely discriminatory way, and certainly not protecting them from more harm and not allowing them to exercise their own rights.
See, one of the things, and I don't want this discussion just to be limited to you and me on this, I want to bring in Justin and Gunnar, but I mean, you talk about goodwill not being enough, you talk about legislation being enough, and it's true that we are a signatory. We have ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that you're telling us they're binding. But clearly we are sitting quite happily in breach. I mean, we're signatories, we've ratified, we have the laws, we have anti-discrimination laws, we have anti-race discrimination, we are committed to all those international conventions and domestic legislation that flows from them, and yet nothing is there's no necessity. I mean, I guess I'm trying to say, having done all that, where do you go from the fact that countries can be in breach? That in itself is not enough, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, in
You're
fact,
saying
change
it's necessary,
is possible.
Though.
Change
it's
is
necessary,
possible.
of course.
It's necessary, and it is possible, and in fact, there has been movement all over the world. In Australia, just now, for example, one of the issues that was raised by the civil society organizations and children's organizations was the need to have a national commissioner for children's rights, for example. And it happened. The National Commissioner for Children's Rights was appointed.
Yes.
Now, of course, now we have to see what will happen next, and how will she be able to operate. But it can happen. But how does it happen? It's because all of you out there, you know,
and these folk here,
have
people
to
like Justin and Gunnar, I mean, you've got the laws, but you need the pressure, no?
Yes.
Yeah, clearly I think that's what you meant by goodwill. It's how do you convert goodwill to change behavior and motivation. Quick story on that. A few months ago, our organization started our first project in Ghana, in the Lake Volta region, where we're seeing children as young as 5 years old being forced into the fishing industry. So these are children that are many times promised an education. Sometimes money is given to the family, sometimes average $20, and promised an education, and the child is taken far away from the family. Maybe they go as far as enrolling the child in school, and bam, 17 hours a day out on the boat with a subsistence living, forced to fish all day. We took a film crew out there and expecting to spend a lot of time out on the water trying to find forced child labor. The problem actually became, could we find a boat without slavery in it? Now this is probably the lowest point of the last 5 years of our work, for me personally, is I got involved in a conversation where there was a 5-year-old boy, exhausted from the night's work, asleep in the bow, never woke up, 7-year-old boy named Ebenezer who was pulling in the nets, and then the conversation with his master who was telling me that if he doesn't force them to work, he doesn't eat. There's not been a conviction. Though slavery and forced child labor is completely illegal, there's not been a conviction in 5 years on that lake. So, these goodwill and recommendations and ratifying of treaties and protocols is really important, but the cost of impunity has to rise on the ground. Absolutely. Because this guy did not, this was the equivalent of jaywalking, is forcing these kids to work. Do you jaywalk here? Like when you go? Yeah, okay, cool, glad some things are universal.
It might mean something slightly different here. It's crossing a road when there's a red light.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Oh.
It's a little bit dangerous here because you go the wrong way. But
sanctions.
But
you're basically saying if there's no sanction.
There's no cost of impunity. In his calculus, in his world, it's okay to do this. Clearly we're hearing the same here. So somehow we have to operationalize our values from the top down. And as far as we're concerned, goodwill is converted as long as it is strategic, and we see not only the passing of laws, but the enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of the story of what somebody at work, just before I left work today, I was talking to someone who'd just come back from Bangladesh. And they were looking at the factory collapses in Bangladesh that I'm sure everybody's read about. I think 1,000 people were reported dead. And she was telling me that every single factory that she visited while she's been there in the last couple of weeks all had signs on the outside saying no child labour, no child labour. And every single factory she went into had child labour. And the one particular factory which she went into was one that was making clothes for Benetton. And she interviewed a 14-year-old girl who lost a leg in the factory fires, in the collapse of the factories, and she'd received a month's pay and $10 as compensation for the loss of her leg. And Sarah was telling me she was just delighted. She'd never seen $10 before in her life. And she'd started work in that factory at 12, and this was at 14 when she'd lost her leg. And this was clearly a place where everybody recognised that there was an obligation because everyone had the no child labour sign. It's just that nobody in Bangladesh was enforcing it. So a similar sort of story, really. I mean, Guna, what's your sort of take on the fact that you can have government laws and international rights, conventions, but
Especially,
enforcement on the ground,
yes,
I guess?
In India, good laws, protective mechanisms, all sorts there. Commission on Child Rights and Protective thing. It should be implemented in a very stringent manner. The law should be implemented very correctly. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Respect of all things. When Dalit issue, especially in Indian context, is different from the children issue, different from other children. Poor children, this child labor, everything is there. But the children and Dalit family children, they suffer so much. Multi challenges and multi atrocities they face. Very easily they put into prostitution, very easily sexual abusement because of the living condition and no caring from the parents. So society and government should take the responsibility and more awareness should be given to the children. We need to take steps for that.
Marta, what do you think are the biggest obstacles as to why that's not happening, why that enforcement? I mean, there seems to be an agreement amongst the three of you that we might have the conventions, we might have the laws, but the enforcement is a problem. What's the biggest obstacle, do you think, to that actually?
Well, maybe using the case of Bangladesh is interesting because it is clear that even before the factory collapse, there was a movement, there were conversations between the different transnational corporations, the workers' movement, the Global Federation of Workers, and the garment industry in Bangladesh itself to try and set out some kind of standards and rules. But who was absent from that conversation was the government of Bangladesh. And this relates directly to Justin's point about impunity. There's no amount of voluntary codes of conduct, of good standards and practices that can be put out there if there is no clear legislation and enforcement of the law in a way that will go, to the end to ensure that breaches to that agreed set of standards, which is a law, gets applied, and that those who are in breach get punished, and the people who are victims, and the children in particular who are victims, get appropriate reparation. If you don't have that complete system, then there will always be issues. No, sorry,
Yeah.
I lost my microphone.
Yeah, can I help you?
While I'm fixing your mic, can I make a point?
Yeah. Perhaps I'll do the mic.
Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, I got you.
Can you hear?
We can't look at human rights as if they're linear. So part of what our team says and what we believe is that, because we're part of helping build what we believe is a movement, we always say in our office, it becomes real when ... It becomes real when companies get involved. It becomes real when laws are being enforced. One of the things that we say, it becomes real when people start losing their jobs because they're not doing what's right. Now they've lost their rights. So this man on the boat who's forcing Ebenezer and his little brother to work, he needs to start losing his rights or know that he may lose his rights to go and work by going to jail or by being fined. That's not in the mix for him. And I would say that as we talk about that at the granular level, I would say that goes even further up. We're doing a lot of work when it comes to business and supply chain work, and the conversation is just really starting to germinate. The reality is, at some point, people will start losing their jobs because they didn't do the right thing when it came to slavery and supply chains. It's not the case now. I don't want to be too brazen and say that we have the moral suasion on our side on this part of it. But eventually, things become real when people start losing their own opportunities because they didn't stand up for the rights of others.
What role do you think there is just for the consumer of products, like if it's fish that comes from this particular place in Ghana, or if it's garments, cheap garments that come from Bangladesh? I mean, is there any effective role in terms of trying to organise a consumer boycott, or is that just too weak? I mean, do you... Yeah, well,
I mean, I believe the role of consumers is extremely powerful, but, and we've seen it everywhere. For example, we see what is happening in this moment with regard to changing the law with respect to food habits and, you know, the kind of unhealthy foods that are provoking the terrible epidemic of obesity all over the world. There are 35 million children who are obese and leading very unhealthy lives because of the advertisement and the production of unhealthy foods. No, so consumers need to mobilize. But to me, from a rights perspective, I think what's important is that consumers are not just consumers; they are citizens. This is not about the business economics. It's about the rights of people to lead healthy lives, lives that have a meaning. No? And therefore, I think we need to stimulate people from being conscientious consumers to, you know, active citizens.
Very
starting
difficult one,
with
even
children.
In this country, to legislate in relation to what we'd call junk food. Very difficult to legislate.
Well, but it's happening.
You know,
it's happening in my country.
Yeah.
And in others.
Well, can I just, when the tragedy that happened in Bangladesh, I think that the natural business move would be to get out. Probably the most human move from a corporate level would be to push in. Like it or not, businesses have a fantastic diplomatic tool in their wallet, and they can shape and sometimes even help with the enforcement of laws. Now I know that I'm speaking big dream, John Lennon type dreams here, but we have to start looking at business as partners and not from a penalty perspective. And the Buycott movement is starting to really take off in the States as a thought and as a theory. And that we fall more into that space.
Boycott?
Buycott.
Boycott.
Instead of reward good behavior instead of punishing bad.
I haven't heard that term before. Right.
Because if there's one thing I know about consumers is they have and I'm one of them, they have a fantastically short attention span. And if you can focus in and show that the market actually points towards what is good, that's hard to do. But if you can prove that, we've seen throughout the last 20 years that you can actually do quite a lot of good in the marketplace. It's much harder, and sometimes you have to do it while holding your nose, but you can make a difference.
Just to raise another issue, Gunnar, do you want to comment on this before I move on to another issue? Or?
Regarding food for children,
the role of consumers in terms of what they can do to affect.
Consumer think that it's also there in India, but for children, midday meal scheme, government is giving good food to the children and all. But I speak only on Dalit point of view, because even government gives food to the children, to young people. There also discrimination is there. They will ask Dalit children to sit aside. They will not eat together. Especially in rural side, India full of rural. Majority children are in the rural side. So children midday meals, because if they sit, they say all people will be polluted, other children will be polluted. So they make us sit aside. Even the cooking food person also, Dalit won't allow. Government will appoint Dalit people to cook as cooking people. But that Panchayat Union or the head of the people, they will appoint another so-called upper caste women to cook, and they will pay little money to the Dalit women and send them. Signing, everything this lady will put, and they will not allow. If she cooks, other people will not eat. It's a very open truth.
Right. I understand.
Even everywhere, two-tumbler system still exists in rural side.
So while the caste system is as strong as it is, it's very difficult to
put
address.
orders.
Yeah.
Especially Indian government, very good laws, very good legislations, very good mechanism, human rights mechanisms are there. Only implementation is weak because of the upper caste people. They hold the powers. They are in the bureaucrats. They are in the.
So how do you affect change within that very strong culture?
Pardon?
How do you affect change? How do you make change? And what seems to me you're saying is it's the culture is
yeah,
actually stopping the enforcement of laws or even trying to better the situation of those who are...
We are all fighting for that. How it's going to change, that's the big question mark. Because all our caste people they're educated, they're holding all positions.
Education.
Dalits only,
We seem to be
only
coming
in the
back to
sweeping.
education, yeah?
Yeah, education, through education it should come. That is the only way.
I mean, just to move it on, I wanted to talk a little bit about, there was a scene in your film, and it was also raised by my colleague when we were discussing this subject today, which was, in the film, a journalist goes and helps a child get out of a situation of, correct me if my memory is wrong, of child prostitution, and essentially pays out the slave owner, and the child goes back to the village. But 10 days later, the child has gone back to the prostitution, and she's gone back because in the time that she's been there, she's become addicted to crack. And the example I want to give, which is not as dramatic and heartbreaking as that, was Sarah, as I was talking today, saying that the children who work in the garment industry, even the girl who has one leg, she wants to go back. She wants to go back because at 14 she feels she has some responsibility to feed her family, her brothers and sisters and her parents, because she's got a job. So, I mean, partly it's important. I don't want to be the negative one that says it's not my job, I'm not an expert, but just to raise that sometimes cracking down and saying you can't do that anymore can hurt the people who are being exploited. I mean, what do you think about those situations? Or am I don't
know if I understand your question. Cracking down on...
Well, saying, what do we do about the fact that the child who is working will go back to that job because she's the only person working in the family? And I suppose I'm just saying enforcement without economic empowerment is problematic.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I think discussions like this are so fantastically important. For those of us that, and I would say that we all are working on issues of justice, economic justice, whatnot. But for those of us who are working on issues of justice when it comes to forced labor, so I don't want to create some type of strata for exploitation, but this conversation around forced labor is just now starting to come into, even though I think it should have always been there, on the world stage. It's just the issues and the topics of development and justice are now starting to find their ways and how they fit together. Now, for some reason, we always put these things in conferences in boxes, and I don't like boxes. My closet makes that pretty obvious. But you can't. Justice is woven in development, is woven into education. You have to build off of these things. So a platform of justice, which means that if you invest in an opportunity for someone, or you invest in education, that has a platform to build off of. Because if you give someone an education or a livelihood, and someone else can come and take that away without any level of law enforcement around that, what good is that investment, right? So it's important. These are not easy discussions, but it's important we start to bring them together.
If I may, yes. Maybe I want to say that the ILO conventions on child labor, are old. I mean, they are really old. There are two conventions with regard to child labor. One with regard to the age, the limit, the minimum age, and the other one with regard to the conditions of work.
What's the
And they're called hazardous
forms of
conditions of work, which of course slavery is part of it. But they are really old, and they have been there for a long time. So we have the system, we have the standards internationally. Most of the countries have ratified. The question is that there has to be clarity of purpose, I think. And one thing that we all need to strive for is that children have no business working. Whatever the conditions. I don't care whether the conditions are good, Children have no business working. There has to be a system where the families have decent jobs, so that the income for the family is decent, and there has to be schools, and there have to be public places where children can, engage in playing and recreation. It's basic stuff, but we have to be clear about it. And I feel that when it comes to a national setting, these are the issues that need to be discussed clearly. No child labor. That means there's no business of any child doing any job outside the school at school hours, etc.
So in a sense, are you saying, look, I'm just messing around if you say, well, look, there's going to be a problem if the child stops working. You've just got to be absolute about this.
Well, but
I mean, no, I'm just...
But let me just interject here,
and
because I do want to say, for many years now, there has been a policy in place, social policies in place on, cash transfers. The cash transfers policies came about, in fact, they started in Brazil, they started in my continent. They started in Brazil because it was clear that the argument that the income generated by children for the family was a sound argument. It was true that some of that income was needed by the families, but it was not the only source of income, and it didn't have to be the children working. It could be the government, for example, engaging in a contract. And this is what a cash conditional transfer program was. Engaging in a contract, the government, the school that would take in the child, and the family that would ensure that that child didn't work but went to school. That was a contract, social contract, at that level.
At that level, on the family level.
At the family level, with cash being provided to the family, and later on, of course, now in a second generation of programs, now the idea is not to provide cash because that's unsustainable over the years. It's to provide jobs, decent jobs. And therefore, the argument that children's, the income generated by children is crucial and is, necessary, gets disarmed.
Absolutely, yeah.
One or 2 points I want to make. The parents' job and income, the family is very, very less. Especially I'm talking about very Dalit and very marginalized families. The alcohol problem is there very much. Almost 99% fathers drink alcohol, and almost Dalit community, even women also drink alcohol. Because why you are drinking? If we ask to do that work, we need to drink. To forget, about the smell, to bear the smell, we need to drink. Even before work, after work, they drink. So whatever they bring money, it's very little and not enough. So necessarily they expect their children to go for work. That's the one aspect. Then government now schemes and benefits they are giving, like a ration shop, rice, grains and all. So one topic is going on whether we can put the money in the family account. So another discussion is coming. If the government gives money to the family, again it will not go. They'll spend the money for the alcohol purpose.
You're talking about putting whatever would have been earned as wages for the job that the government's provided, not handing the money actually over, putting it in an account.
Put it in cash.
And what
Instead
sort of-
giving a ration, they are trying to put cash. In few states, they are going to implement it. But what we feel, and all NGOs and all we feeling, it's very waste money. Again, the father will take the money and drink, and that's all over.
I mean, what takes you taking the money out of, what
It
stops
will
you
not
taking
come.
the money
Again,
out of the
the
bank?
pressure is on the women, mother. Mother, she
That's the
should take care of
experience
the
all over the
family
world.
Yeah, no, I'm just
and
asking
the
'cause it's-
children.
there's a similar
Really,
thing
the
here.
women are sufferers. Especially Dalit women suffer. Women in general are the sufferers. Really, it's very bad situation.
So do you think this is a good idea, is what I'm asking, that the money be put in an account, and is it only accessible?
I don't think so. It is not good.
It just doesn't work?
Yeah, at least ration government gives, especially it's a very danger to the women part.
Okay.
Again, more shoulders on the women part, in respect of Indian situation, I can say.
So, it being 7 o'clock or 5 to 7, is there anybody who'd like to ask a question out there? Ah. There are young women in orange T-shirts that have got microphones. So if you would like to ask a question of any of the panellists. Yes.
Hello, thank you very much. It's Shanti Raman from Sydney, obviously. A question to Marta, really about the whole issue of using the language of rights. How do you, when you are there in the committee, actually, how do you actually look at the issue of proportions and when a country...
Proportions?
When a country presents their NGO report and their national report on the committee, to the committee, a country like Australia versus a country like Bangladesh, for instance, and you actually have to try and use the language of rights and the convention and examine what the country has put forward as its report. So how do you actually, in your own, within the committee, actually examine those huge issues of thousands or millions versus, say, hundreds in another? So when we're talking about global justice and poverty and all of that, how do you actually...
I think so.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Well, first of all, the convention itself, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is an amazing document. I mean, if you haven't read it, please do. It's really forward-looking, and it's very clear. So the rights contained, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights contained in the Convention on the Rights of the Child are clear standards.
And so you can,
and of course, universally
not sure
applied.
That's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Universally applied. That's number one. So you have that instrument. And on the other hand, you have the practice of a committee that has been in existence for 24 years now, 23 years now, which is that it engages in a dialogue with the state. And this is important. This is not a question for governments only, because governments come and go, you know. And in this country, my country, it's only 4 years. It's very short for a government. Very short for them. So these are issues that engage the state as a whole. So it's government after government, and it's all the state. It's the parliament, it's the judiciary, it's the government, and it is civil society also. And this is the dialogue that is so rich, and I find it fascinating. I must say, these last 4 years were the best years in my life, because we were really able to engage in a conversation, sometimes harsh, sometimes difficult, sometimes we even suspected that it was entirely truthful in some cases, you know. But we had the privilege of having information coming from different NGOs, you know, from the children organizations themselves. Testimonies of children are extremely important in this. In fact, for Australia, we had the children, a delegation of children, 12-year-old girl and another one, 17-year-old from Aboriginal origins, that brought home to us very vividly, you know, the issues. So, yes, it is difficult, masses of document, lots to read, But at the end of the day, what's important is the possibility of engaging in a dialogue and seeing possibilities.
And being effective. I mean,
well,
that's the final crunch, isn't it?
The question is, of course, to try and make recommendations that are realistic,
yes,
but at the same time are out there, are at the same time they are pushing forward the agenda. And I think in the case of Australia, the fact that the committee has zeroed into the issues of extreme vulnerabilities of Aboriginal children, of asylum-seeking children, the issues of juvenile justice, recognizing that the context is generally, of course, very good for everybody in Australia. The fact that we were able to zero in and that these recommendations now get taken and people run with them out there in the country is hopeful.
Any other questions? Or just, I think your hand up there. Yeah.
This is another one for Marta.
Oh, I don't want to monopolize.
Sorry. I've been working with the asylum seeker children on Manus Island.
I didn't understand.
Sorry, I've been working with asylum seeker children who are being sent to Manus Island as a social worker.
Do you know Manus Island?
In Papua New Guinea.
Yeah,
so it's the offshore processing centre.
Yes, I know.
And I've seen how much they suffer, and the UN's reminded Australia that their obligations are not optional, yet they're still not upholding the obligations. And I just want to know who actually is taking care of their rights if Australia isn't.
What is the specific question?
I just want to know who is enforcing the laws that Australia has signed, and if Australia isn't looking after the rights of the kids there, then who is?
Well, on the specific question of the Manus Island, the offshore detention centres, clearly Australia is in breach of all its international agreements, obligations rather, both in terms of the fact that there's a complete barrier and that the people and the children in particular get sort of farmed out to a third country where there is not necessarily the conditions nor the legislation in place, number one. Number two, the fact that children get detained. Detention is supposed to be the last resort. This is, in this case, it's the first resort. And so clearly, Australia, it has to be put to task by the international community.
I think the question is, you say they're clearly in breach. Well, what can be done about that? Is that right? Who has the responsibility for doing something to say, you're in breach, stop it? Is that what you mean? Is that your question? What are the consequences and the consequences of being in breach, and who enforces those consequences?
Well,
is that right?
The international community is a community of conversations, shall we say. And while it is true that in the UN and internationally, standards are being set, and nations are being put to the test against those standards, it is also true that there is no sort of enforcement mechanism beyond, and let me say, some of the regional mechanisms. In the case of the Americas, there is the Inter-American Court of Justice, and human rights issues can be put and have been put to the Court of Justice. In Europe, same thing, and in Africa, same thing. In this part of the world, there isn't such a mechanism. There isn't such a mechanism, and therefore there's only the International Court of the Hague. But for issues to be put to the Hague, it's much more complicated. No? So we have to rely on public voices. No? We have to rely on constant reminders internationally. In the Commission of Human Rights, there is process called the Universal Periodic Review, where all the countries that sit and they examine the one peer. And Australia did go through the Universal Periodic Review very recently, and this issue was brought up, and the other countries asked Australia to change its law. But it has to be done.
I'd like to ask Justin a question. Were you about to say something?
No, I'm ready for your question.
If we just go back for a moment to individual responsibilities, you've got your website, Slavery Footprint. I was just curious to know what sort of response you've had from Australians. I mean, has it got a presence here, and are there many Australians involved, and what on an individual level are you asking people to do with that website? Because people here may be interested in logging on if...
Yeah, well, Australians broke the website yesterday, so that was cool.
They broke the website?
Yeah, I went on one of your TV shows and the website broke, so...
Because so many people tried to log on, or...?
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it only takes about 3 to break it, but it was awesome. I'm kidding. Part of our aim of our organization is we want to operationalize care. And, even just hearing, what you were talking about and where does the pressure lie and where do the triggers lie? It's really hard to know where the triggers lie. Between that, I still don't know where the trigger lies for enforcement after hearing that. And we can talk later and we can figure it out. But most people don't want to invest that much time. They just want to see things work well. And here's the thing, you can argue that people should have a longer attention span for these things, but that's not necessarily fair because now you're not getting inside of their world. Most people, and I'm one of them, are very, very busy running their lives.
And you can't,
but they care.
Yeah,
and so you have to be able to harness that care and operationalize it towards the triggers that matter. So Slavery Footprint is a way of saying, slavery and supply chains, that sounds impossible to deal with. But what the good thing that we have on our side is, quote unquote, free markets. We believe free markets might just free people if we start to operationalize them and start to shine light on areas of the markets where it's not so pleasant. So Slavery Footprint gives people a way to understand and internalize their own unwillful complicity in a much larger narrative, and then gives them an opportunity to act in a very strategic and simple process.
Is that largely through what Buycott says? I've just learned to use this word. I have to use it again. I'm sorry.
You're going to use that a lot. I know.
But is that largely through boycotts and boycotts?
It's through coalescing will. That's another way of saying boycott. Because the truth is, what we allow consumers to do is to contact directly to the people that they're buying from.
Okay.
So once you go through Slavery Footprint, you can write letters directly to the companies that you purchase from. Will that get them to change? They might already be good. I think the reality is we don't know. Everything is being hidden. And so by shining a light and talking about it and amplifying conversation, the good comes out, and we like to celebrate that. And then the quiet, that deafening quiet is what we're really after.
Because there's no point in saying to people, look, you ought to actually invest the time into going through every item of clothing you wear and working out where it comes from and how many slaves are involved in producing it. You're never going to do that. We'll do that work for you. You log on, you find out, you make the decision about whether or not you're going to do something. Is that essentially?
Absolutely. We'll amplify the conversation for you, and we're already starting to see the coalition of the willing come together around this issue.
Any Australians here have logged on? No? Is that a hand? And how did you know about it? Don't know. Are there any further questions in the audience, or shall I? Yes, question here?
Thank you. My name is Ian Maxwell. I'm very taken by your comment about the cost of impunity. I've spent 25 years in global business development, and I'm interested in all the panelists' views on the linkage between corruption, and I apologise if I don't get the language right, but child rights and freedom, because it seems to me that corruption is also a major impediment, and to what extent we should link the issues of corruption and the debate that's going on there with the debate that we're talking about tonight.
I think just to pick the first lens of, what can international business do when it comes to corruption. Again, even just using the issue of Bangladesh and seeing something that obviously has been going on for a long time, whether it's corruption or lack of attention, whatever you want to call it, I feel the same way you do. I don't always have the right words.
I mean, earlier this year, that's just if I can interrupt your answer, I mean, this has been going on and people have been dying, and 13 died in January this year in a factory, and of course no one knows about it because 13 is not enough. It was only... Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, just to reinforce what you're saying.
It's a salient point. I haven't met anyone in business that doesn't care about the same things I do. We love our children, we love others, we want to use what we have to create a tremendous influence. There's a great quote from one of the civil rights leaders in the United States, who, his name is Andrew Young, and he worked directly with Martin Luther King. And he tells this story. I had a privilege of him telling a few of us and encouraging us this summer. And he told us a story about when he and Martin Luther King went to the president to try to pass the Voters' Rights Act. And they sat with the president, and the president said, I've got all the responsibility, but no power. Okay. Well, I think every president feels that way, and any person in politics feels that way. And sometimes that's an excuse, but sometimes it's actually the truth. And Andrew said, as he walked out of the White House, the West Wing, Martin Luther King was very quiet, and Dr. King said, "We got to get that president some power." And so sometimes the decision makers and the people who are actually the ones who can turn the key need us to come around them to give them the power to root out corruption. And business can play a fantastic role of influence, because when the dollar is held at bay, sometimes people tend to act. And again, we don't really have a movement until people are threatened to lose their own jobs, when they're not paying attention to the rights of others.
When you say no power, do you mean no mandate?
No, I'm saying they don't have the coalition of the willing.
I understand.
Sorry, could we hear from the other panelists?
Oh, on the same question? Sorry, yes. Gunnar, would you like to... Could you pose the question again? Just... Oh...
There's a linkage of corruption with child rights and childcare.
And how...
Corruption, especially in India, so much. Because of that, all people are suffering. Corruption, political corruption, even from top to bottom, corruption. Without corruption, nothing will move. India is the highest place, I think.
So you think that's of primary importance to tackle?
Corruption everywhere. That also affects not only child, in all aspects.
Well,
because the government programs and schemes, correctly they are putting. But when it reaches the last, it will come very, very less to the people.
Are you talking about corruption with aid that's given? Is that, or just corruption? Are you talking corruption generally? Or are you talking specifically about the corruption of aid dollars?
All field. Then child rights, automatically it will affect, Family affects, children affects. The education affects, children's education affects. Dalits, for Dalits, government is, in the budget, they allocate more money, but it will not come to an end.
If a particularly bad amount of corruption is revealed in the media, does that have any influence at all in trying to stop it?
At the moment, the people will get fear, that's all. Then later, it will automatically...
So they stop for a while and then just continue when the fuss
corruption
dies
is there.
down.
That's very open truth.
Okay. So, and Marta,
Well,
can you address...
internationally speaking, what's happening that's interesting is that the World Bank and the international financial institutions, are clarifying more and more a set of standards with regard to where to invest and how to invest. And this, of course, includes the fight against corruption. And so what is beginning to happen now is that clearly governments and institutions of government that finance projects through business in countries where there is corruption have very stringent rules. the question, of course, is that they need to be applied, and then that there has to be help to ensure that in those countries where corruption is rampant, the situation is changed. Often it's because government workers themselves are very, ill-paid, and the rules of the game are not clear, etc. So it can be. So there has to be help to change that also in the countries where investments will take place.
Am I right in saying there's been some improvement in process as well in terms of who gets the money? I mean, a lot more emphasis on microfinancing. I mean, financing very specific projects so that you don't get the filter down, or at every layer that money goes through, that money gets siphoned off. Mm-hmm. Is there? I mean, I just thought there was a more understanding of that through World Bank projects, that giving huge amounts of money to huge projects is in a sense asking for trouble. Whereas if you attempt something, and there's been a greater understanding, yes, particularly by the World Bank, of that.
You're absolutely right.
1, 2. So if the woman in the, is it a white jacket? Grey jacket? And then with the hand up on the black t-shirt next. Forgive me if I'm neglecting people at the back. I can't see for the lights, but I'll make sure. Yep. And you'll be the third question. Yep.
This very enthusiastic man.
Oh, right.
My name's Sarah.
Yes,
yes,
waving up there.
Is there someone waving up there? We'll get you.
Yeah,
okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
If I don't put my hand like that, you're just black. It's just.
Okay.
Your question?
So my name's Sarah. I'm 19 and I live in Sydney now, but I grew up in regional Australia. And I was that 17-year-old girl that met with you at the committee for the Australia's reporting a couple of years ago. And what I found was the issues that we raised with the committee are still an issue, and they were probably an issue the last time Australia reported to the committee. And so I'm just wondering, how does that compare with other countries? Is there a trend that the same issues just crop up time and time again? Or are other developed countries better at doing it?
Well, I think I've understood the gist. Sorry. Yes, although not the accent, I must say. Well, yes, you're right that many of the issues get raised time and time again. I mean, for example, let me give you, in the case of Australia, the question of the system of juvenile justice. As you know, the convention establishes that children under 18, all children are under 18 by definition, need to have a system of justice that when they get into trouble, in conflict with the law, they are treated in a different way than adults in recognition of the fact that they are children. And that therefore their potential to become citizens, full-fledged citizens, and reintegrate and reincorporate their energies and their abilities into society are there, which is not the case with adults. So the convention calls for a specialized system of juvenile justice. And it tries that children up to a certain age, maybe for 12 or 14 or even 16, that they are not put in contact at all with the judicial system, but that they are responsible between up to the age of 18, from 14 maybe up to the age of 18, they are responsible and need to be treated in a different way. In the case of Australia, I can't imagine this. Australia still has 10 years of age as the age of criminal responsibility. 10 years of age. A 10-year-old
is that in every
is
state?
criminally responsible in Australia. This has been raised time and time again by the committee, and it has not been changed.
And so do you find that other developed countries, it's a similar story, or they're better at dealing with what the committee raises?
But it depends on the issues. There are many different situations. The question of, let me say, you're talking of developed countries. For example, the Nordic countries, maybe there is a Danish or a Swede here in the audience. The Nordic countries are very interesting because the Nordic countries have probably the highest standards in terms of human rights. But when it comes to transforming the convention into national law, they say that they are not interested in doing that because their laws piecemeal, are better than the convention.
Right.
That's the Danish and the Swedish for you. No? But it's piecemeal. And this is the argument that we have been engaged in for 20 years with them, in the committee.
The next question up was there, then one over here, and then one up the back there. I know you're waving. I'd already promised these. So 1, 2, 3, and then up the back. Your question? And who?
What are the strategies NGOs can use that have been proven to be successful in minimalising the abuse of children's rights?
I didn't understand.
Sorry, can you ask that question again? I couldn't catch it either.
What are the strategies NGOs can use that have proven to be successful in minimalising the abuse of children's rights?
Well, perhaps we'd ask that to one of the two who are working in NGOs. It was what strategies are you suggesting, could you suggest that would be effective for NGOs here to use? Is that the question?
Yes.
So Gunnar or Justin, who wants to have a go at
What's the question?
advice for NGOs about how to be effective? Any
NGOs.
Can you talk
What
about some of
works?
the things that you're
Thank you.
doing
Who
that
is
are
it?
effective?
Yeah, NGO work is effective on
Yeah,
children.
what works?
Very much. NGOs plays vital role on women issues, children issues.
But how
and,
is the question? How?
If you had to say,
How? Because for children we are working, especially Dalit children. Of course, other children also we are taking care. We give education, supportive, guidance, and if the parents are not supportive, we take care of the children, and we run tuition centers every day because their home will be very, very small, 6 by 6, 8 by 6. There's the only room is their house, sleeping, dining, kitchen, hall, everything the same room. So the children won't have a sufficient space, sufficient infrastructure for their studies. So we conduct tuition centers. Children come to our center and we monitor their education. We give advice to the parents to take care of the children's education. Also we visit the school where the children are studying. We are monitoring that also. And
So
every
very
year
direct
we run summer
involvement.
camps. We motivate, we encourage through education part, then giving awareness. Youth meeting we used to conduct. Many NGOs are doing so wonderful. Whatever the parents lacking and the government lacking, NGOs are fulfilling the gaps.
yep,
I could say.
Marta suggesting control and what was the
Monitoring.
control and monitoring, sort of
Yeah.
making. Yep, Justin, do you want to?
Particularly in the work that we work in, which is in ending slavery, freeing people is not enough. You have to put bad guys in jail, and that is a whole cloth system. That's a fancy way of just saying, just finish the job. So there is a tremendous sexiness around freeing people, but if we don't break the system that enslaves them and that hurts them, exploits them, then we're just opening up the door for others. And two things are viral, penalty and freedom. When people go to jail for putting people in slavery, word gets out. And that starts to become a bad business to get in, is probably a better word to say it. Freedom is also viral, because I've seen firsthand the light in the eyes of people whose lives are better than they could have even imagined, and there's nothing they want to do more than share that. So,
We're running out of time, so I can only take two more.
If I may just add, I think
Yeah.
engaging good journalists, committed and energetic, and media in general is also a strategy.
it's fantastic.
Yeah, never
Sharon.
forget
Like Liz Jackson.
Thank you. And I think the media can be pretty effective at shining a light, and I'm not just trying to suggest that you watch Four Corners program on Bangladesh, but I think media pressure is part of community pressure, and it comes from pressure from the community, which is why you make certain stories, but also it feeds back into what people understand about what's going on, because people, like you're saying, don't necessarily have the time to do the research themselves. So We'll just take 2 more questions.
We have to get this guy in the back.
This guy in the back. I know. Look, perhaps, can you just wait? I've just got to get the guy in the back and then...
Can you wave again?
It's so
There
great.
you are.
Yeah.
I know. Look, so we'll try it. Because I'm aware that we'll be running
Thank
out of
you. Thank you for your patience. Firstly, I'd like to really commend you guys for the work you do. I think it's fantastic. And secondly, Justin, you said we've got to put the bad guys in jail. Why can't we give the bad guy, at least give the bad guy an opportunity to stop doing what he's doing and replace it with something good? So rather than having laws and regulations and punishments and whatever, actually go to those people and say, here's a better way of doing what you're doing without slavery. And I think we need to invest more time in that sort of activity to give them a way out rather than being, pardon the expression, self-righteous sitting here in the West saying, oh, you're a bad person, we're going to stop what you're doing.
Yeah, and in response to that, I think there's a blend of ways to do that. Even just the example I was giving about the Lake Volta region in Ghana, retraining, and I know this sounds strange, but people who are enslaving children and showing them there's a better way to make money is actually a more effective strategy if you can implement it and if you have the time and resources to implement it. But I've also met people who've quite frankly, reform is really not an option, and jail is a better option for them.
And this will be the last question.
Sorry, look, I just want to say one quick thing. The world has forever been trying to stop people growing poppies in Afghanistan to sell for opium, to bomb people in Colombia for doing drug trading, and the fact is that bombing the bad guys doesn't work.
Okay. Look, we could ask everyone's opinion. I'm really sorry to just leave it at your statement, but I think we get your opinion on that.
With so much discussion on the systemic levels and ways to enforce, I guess, standards and that sort of thing, what is being done in the communities where, I guess, exploitation is commonplace or is accepted by a large portion of the population, whether they be victims or they're people who are part of the system that's creating the issue? What is being done to I guess, change that, or alternatively, do you think that is not a roadblock? Sorry, one more part of it is that I feel like the answer to this is education, but do you think education is effective at that level? And
I think Kuna's addressed a number of things, what is being done in her community at a very hands-on level, and I think education has come up a couple of times from the panellists in terms of, but you want to basically know from communities that are particularly vulnerable and particularly exploited, what can be done from within those communities. Is that the question?
Yeah, do you think education is reaching, I guess, at the community level, whether they be part of organisations or individually, whether it's reaching them in effecting that change?
Who wants to put their hand up to answer that question?
Yeah,
what, two?
I'd like to.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think education, to try to draw the threads between the conversation here, I think education. I think one lens through look through education is building awareness, and even to talk about Lake Volta region, a lot of folks don't actually know what's happening, right? We have this macro level of understanding the exploitation, how it all works. When you get at the micro level, people are living on a subsistence existence, and they don't quite know all the dynamics that are happening around them. And while it may feel and look like cultural imperialism to come in and say, this part or that part's wrong, a lot of times a great preventative measure is saying, this is happening, we're seeing this, and you need to be aware of this. Whether it's people coming and asking to take your child and give them an education, and actually they're throwing them on a boat or in a brothel, many times awareness programs on the ground are actually quite effective and actually kind of raise the cost of impunity just naturally. And we are seeing that. And I think that's another way of looking at not necessarily education of an individual, but education of a community.
Do you want to brief?
Yes, let me quickly tell you that the Committee on the Rights of the Child and the Committee on Women, CEDAW, we are working together on a general comment, which is a sort of a standard creation kind of document, on the issue of harmful practices against girls, and in particular zeroing into female genital mutilation and early marriages as two very harmful practices against girls. And what we are coming out with is that there has to be a mix of strategies, as you're in fact saying, I think, which is, on the one hand, you need to understand the issue and make everybody understand the issue, that these are harmful practices. Even though the objective of a family, a mother, may be very good, maybe for the good of the girl. And therefore, these customs need to be changed, but they need to be changed by understanding them, talking, and agreeing that there's a different social norm that can be applied. That's one thing. But the other thing that has to be in place is the law prohibiting the harmful practice, and an enforcement of the law, and ensuring that there is no impunity to breaching of that law. So it's a mix that needs to be applied.
Good. Would you like to make the last comment, and then we'll wind up?
In addition to that, regular education, awareness education, and many women they do not know why we are suffering. They will say, it is my fate, so I am suffering. God created me like that. It is my fate in this world. When God created me, He has written on my forehead, all sufferings is for me. I need to suffer like that. So to know this situation and how to come out of that, for that also it's education.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you will understand.
Well, just before we thank them, I just want to say thank you very much for your coming. This has been the 69th One Just World Forum. We hope you're able to leave here tonight with a deeper understanding of the complexities of child rights and child protection issues and some of the challenges faced by the world's most vulnerable children. Very briefly before you go, could you keep a few things in mind, which is one, you can be part of the conversation by going to the One Just World website and by tweeting using the OneJW hashtag. And you can also check the video of tonight's forum and the whole One Just World series on the website, again, onejustworld.com.au. 2, have a chat with the people at the tables in the foyer. Oh, this is an instruction, have a chat with the people at the tables in the foyer, and they can give you some great tips on how to get involved. As can the forms on your chairs. Everyone's got a form, and that'll tell you how you can get more involved. And 3, please take a moment to fill in the evaluation form on your sheet and hand it to one of the volunteers on the way out. And finally, and most importantly, on behalf of One Just World, please thank our guests, Marta Mauras, Justin Dillon and Gunnar Vincent. Thank you very much indeed.